We're in a working luncheon. We are told right now President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, they're worlds apart politically. But there is a history between the Trumps and the Trudeaus dating back to Pierre Trudeau's days leading that country, an iconic liberal figure, if you will. And his son would often accompany his dad, including meetings with Donald Trump. That was then, this is now. But there's a lot that these two have in simpatico here, where these differences might not be as glaring as you think. So we're going to wait for that. An hour from now, these two are supposed to have a joint press conference. So we'll hear what they have to say. All right, in the meantime, we have economist Dave Maney joining us, Brian Westbury, Fox Business's Jerry Willis. So Dave, to you first on this sort of pragmatic relationship. Of course, it's been always close between our two countries. It was a big deal, I guess, when Canada just announced that its population just hit 30 million. I was shocked. I thought it was even more than that. But we are miles apart politically. But the Prime Minister realizes that his popularity of late has been ebbing. So he's cognizant of that, right?
I think he's cognizant of that. I mean, full disclaimer, I'm married to a Canadian, so I have interests on both sides of the border.
I knew you had an agenda.
I would say that his strong suit is not his economic policy making, and his economic reliance and dependence on the United States is overwhelming. We have something very close to an even balance of trade with Canada, which is very different from, which is one of the reasons I believe that President Trump has not made them a target. And as the Toronto Globe and Mail said in an editorial over the weekend, his job is essentially to build a relationship with President Trump. He has more at stake, in effect, than President Trump does. And I think he'll be working very hard to try to do that today.
You know, I think right now, Brian, if memory serves me right, it was Trudeau who had a problem. That is, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had a problem when Barack Obama just cut Keystone right at the knees. And that was it, because it was in Canada's vested interest to keep it going, even though he shared the president, that is President Obama's environmental worries, and he tried to assure the president that, look, this is not an environmental problem. Obviously, you know, the President Obama went one way. So he might actually be a little relieved, right?
Definitely relieved. I mean, one of the key pieces of trade between Canada and the U.S. is energy. And, you know, there's a lot of focus on NAFTA just in general. And I want to, you know, in the big scheme of things, NAFTA as a trade bill, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it was one of the better trade bills that we've ever done. It literally did lower tariffs in many, many areas. That with Mexico, we have some carve-outs for energy that we don't have with Canada. But I wouldn't worry if I were Canada about reopening NAFTA. We want to be good partners with Canada. We want NAFTA to work. We want free and fair trade. And I think Canada wins in that way, especially in the commodities area, the energy area.
What do you think, Jer?
Well, I got to tell you, the power balance goes all one way here. 3/4 of Canada's exports are sold right here in the U.S. of A. Believe it or not, 20% of everything they produce in that company comes here. They need us, and they need us badly. But to talk about NAFTA more broadly, look, I don't really understand why people think that a 23, 24-year-old agreement that has helped Mexico immeasurably, why that's not something that could be opened up again and discussed. It seems to me that people think it's inviolate. I really don't understand why. Mexico's exports during that time have grown 10 times. So opening it up again makes sense. But Canada today, they've got to be careful about what they say. They need us more than we need them.
You know, when we look at these type of meetings, I'm always struck by how the curiosity of foreign leaders who come to meet this bigger-than-life character who none of them saw winning the presidency and yet is now opposite them in a room, in this case the Oval Office. And I wonder how the local press takes that in. I know in Japan they've talked up the idea that the Prime Minister and Donald Trump got along famously, had a good golf game, talked a great deal about it. The same in Britain, where, of course, the press is much more skewed liberally against that cozy relationship, I guess, as Maggie Thatcher was for her tightness with Ronald Reagan. What do you think of that, and how, for foreign consumption, their own, you know, citizens' consumption, this is weighed?
I would say that if you read the Canadian press accounts, they are as or more hostile than the American press accounts toward President Trump. And I do, and that, Neil, happens to be something I do on a daily basis.
You sure that's not just your wife just unhappy with this whole thing?
It's not. She may be, but I can tell you, like, the tone in the press there is overwhelmingly negative. And it so much so that I, as a, not an enormous fan of the president's, but kind of a pretty big fan of fairness, I have actually found reading their press gets under my skin as an American. So it's really been the drumbeat's very negative.
Obviously, we set the economic tune and tone, and you could look at that, Brian, and say the Canadians obviously want us to succeed, whether that's because of what the president is doing or not. They don't want us to fail, right?
Right. They don't want us to fail, and they want to be good friends. You know what? I find it fascinating. If you only read the press, the reception of Donald Trump and the things he is doing are tearing the world apart, et cetera, et cetera. But if you really talk to people, look at polls, look at approval ratings, look at the things that people like or dislike, what you find is a totally different world. And I would argue this is sort of like the election. And the election was, no one predicted that Trump would win, and yet he did. And I think that around the world as well, that regular people, they're waiting for things to happen. They're not fearful that bad things might happen. They want to find out if bad things do happen. And so far, bad things haven't happened. And I think the longer he is president, the more people will realize that, in fact, America does want to be friends with other countries, does want to trade with them, just wants a free and fair playing field. And I think that's what we're going to get.
All right, guys, thank you all very, very much.